Welcome to Voice Is, a podcast where we have conversations with people whose voices we love to delve into the good, the bad, and the messy of what makes your voice yours. I'm Casey Erin Clark.
And I'm Julie Fogg. We're co-founders of Vital Voice Training, a voice, public speaking, and communication coaching company out to change the conversation about what your voice is supposed to sound like.
Hi, everybody. I'm Casey Erin Clark, coming in from New York City.
I'm Julie Fogg, coming in from San Francisco, and we are shaking up our usual format for Voice Is for the month of January to bring you a three-part series on one of our favorite topics, executive presence. The fancy term for what leaders look and sound like is executive presence. If you've ever been in a situation where you've been told you didn't have it, that shameful moment, you may have been given a solution like just sound more confident or just be yourself, or even be told you don't have what it takes to be a leader, which is patently untrue. So in true VVT style, we're going to unpack this knot and we're going to lift up the hood, take a little bit of a glimpse underneath to look at some of the specific problems we've identified with this use of the term executive presence.
Problem number one. The definition of executive presence is nebulous, to say the least. You know it when you see it, or most often when you don't. But of course, who's doing the seeing is what matters here, because success is in the eye of the beholder. That beholder may hold incredible power over whether or not you advance in your career based solely on their impression of you. And they may never have examined why they believe what they believe that leaders look and sound like.
Problem number two, executive presence advice is either super general or wildly specific. We've all seen the articles and the books and the how-to guides, right? Like be calm, cool, and collected. Well, according to whom?
And then there's the other side of the advice, this pinpoint precise checklist kind. This kind of wildly specific advice might be easier to learn, but listen up, friends. Attempting to follow this kind of advice most often results in crippling self-consciousness.
Problem number three, both definition and advice are context-free. They ignore both who you are and the situations that you exist in, and they ignore how the same actions and attitudes and gestures on two very different people will be perceived differently, even in the same situations. And they ignore that someone may follow every piece of executive presence advice they can get their hand on to the letter, but the decision maker in the room may not receive it well. That means for most of us, this advice carries with it inherent contradictions and impossible double binds, and very little of this advice allows for the complexity of being a human around other humans.
And here's the thing. Executive presence is not the same thing as leadership. Executive presence is a costume. And for so many people, it's a costume that doesn't fit very well because it's based on this murky sea of bias and old-fashioned standards of what leadership is supposed to look and sound like. So we're going to break down the components of this executive presence costume to see how much of it is actually achievable and how much of it actually has to do with the role of leader. We've put this plethora of advice into three categories: polish, poise, and power. And over the next 3 weeks, we're going to be breaking those down for you. We're going to be digging in, we're going to be looking at the problems, and we're going to be giving you some new tools to do this in a new, fresh way that feels a little bit more like you. Because here at Vital Voice Training, we are all about expanding the definition and changing the conversation about what leaders look and sound like.
Hello. My name is Julie. I am a co-founder of Vital Voice Training.
Hi, everybody. I'm Casey Erin Clark, and I am the other co-founder of Vital Voice Training. This is our very first time on StreamYard and our very first time on LinkedIn Live as Vital Voice Training. There's an interesting Funhouse Mirror thing that's happening, which I think is going to come up in another little bit with our discussion about power, which is that StreamYard mirrors us. So I think I'm lifting one hand and I'm lifting the other hand, which is very exciting. The other thing that we want to let you know is that we are so excited to answer any questions that you have. We know there's about a 10-second delay, so we'll be keeping an eye on the chat for that. And we look forward to your questions about power. And we can't wait to dive in. This is the third of our series on executive presence. So what else have we been talking about, Julie?
We introduced a 3-part series on executive presence because we found the 3 pillars were power, poise, and polish. So the first 2 are polish and poise, where we get to really dive into, what those actually mean, what they're supposed to mean, the problems and obstacles inherent in them. And we get to talk all about that. So this lands us today in the epic place of power, which we are very excited to talk to you about, but also we want to have this conversation in a way that really acknowledges that we are 2 white ladies that are talking about this and therefore benefit from inherent structures, and that influences our perspective. We really want to make sure that we get all voices heard in the Q&A and everything as we are talking about this, because that is the essence of what makes this discussion powerful. It's not just us telling you what we think. It's the conversation.
And it's the complexity, because the reason that we love issues like this is precisely because they are unsolvable. We started Vital Voice Training very much from the perspective of there's not one way to do good communication. There's not one way to show up with some version of executive presence that's outside of who you actually are and win at communication at all times. We don't do tips and tricks. We don't do checklists. We do complexity, but we don't want to leave you in the complexity. We want to give you the framework for it so that we can all start to make choices.
We talk about this as guideposts in the gray area, because the gray area is where most information exists, but when we don't have any sort of guideposts or way to unpack it, it's almost like it doesn't exist at all. So we want to, as we step into these more complex and nuanced topics, just little guideposts. We're not going to make the journey for you, but we can say, hey, look over here.
So we want to start the way that we start with our Power Party workshop. And this is a chance right up atop for some audience interaction. But we can start with ours since we've got that exciting 10-second delay on our comments. So the question is, when you think of powerful communication, what pop culture, fictional, ideally, figures come to mind for you? So Julie, do you want to start us off? What are your pop culture models of power?
I mean, I think about this a lot, and I do consume a lot of television. So, but the one that often comes to mind for me is somebody who embodies, it's almost like a classic kind of power. And it's not exactly the model of what we're going for, but I think it's a good hearty start. And that's Candice Bergen in Boston Legal. She comes in as Shirley Schmidt, and absolutely her presence is so incredibly powerful. And of course she has that gorgeous voice, but she inserts herself into every situation. That's her business in this way that is so beautiful to watch. So yeah, I'm going to go with Candice Bergen.
Candice Bergen.
Yeah.
I'm looking in the comments and seeing if we've got any other ideas. So we want to hear your pop culture ideas of power as well so that we can talk about them. For me, the one that keeps coming up for me lately, and probably it's because I'm such a huge fan of the series, Ted Lasso, the 2 female characters on Ted Lasso. So we've got Rebecca, as played so beautifully by, her name is escaping me.
Hannah Waddingham.
Hannah Waddingham, thank you so much. Who is sort of a classic example. I think she's tall, she's gorgeous. She has this very deep voice and this very big presence. And she is in a powerful position with the team. And then we have Keely, who is, I think, the kind of woman that a lot of people dismiss. She's petite. She was a social media influencer, like famous for being famous. And she is also powerful, just in a very, very different way. So we get these 2 models. And the other thing that I love that the show does is that they don't pit those 2 women against each other.
Yep.
because that is, and maybe we start there with how women in particular tend to be pitted against each other in a power struggle. Okay, we've got a comment here. Oh yes, all right, Lady Gaga for Powerful Presence, and Diane Lockhart in Good Wife, which I have yet to see, and everyone has told me I need to see this.
It's been so long since I watched Good Wife. I'm trying to remember.
Is that Christine Baranski? I think it's Christine Baranski, right?
I honestly don't know. So I'm not even going to
Yes.
not pretend. But yes, Good Wife is such a gorgeous source of, power, the whole spectrum from generous to toxic.
Yes. Well, so on that idea, I think, speaking of toxic power, particularly from the lens of women, because obviously, again, as we already said, we are women. We started Vital Voice Training very much thinking about women's voices and women's ability to show up powerfully in a space. I think that we have a lot of really toxic examples culturally about what powerful women look like. And we talked about this in Poise and Polish already, like the Claire Underwoods of the world, who are very ice queen, very buttoned up, don't ever show anything. And then perhaps fall apart on the couch later with a glass of wine, the Olivia Popes of the world. And then we have the manipulative, backbitey cultural stories about how women gain power. So we were talking about necks and heads earlier, Julie.
Oh my goodness. Yes, yes. And Casey and I both had heard this phrase from different sources. She from My Big Fat Greek Wedding.
Big Fat Greek Wedding.
And me, it was told to me by one of our guides when I was studying at the Moscow Art Theater, and it was said, imagine this in a very deep Russian accent, because I think it does make it a little bit more powerful. It's the man is the head, but the woman is the neck. And then in
Big Fat Greek Wedding, the mother goes on to say, and the neck can turn the head any way she wants, which is, I think that sort of soft power, that not overt power, that covert power, the power to influence without actually being direct about it, is the kind of power that women have been allowed throughout history. But I think what mirrors that then is this cultural narrative of women are not trustworthy. Women are inherently manipulative, inherently backbitey, inherently ready to stab you in the back in order to get power, because they can't just have it. They can't just use it. It's got to be underneath everything. What do you think about that?
I think the idea of manipulation comes out of, women are told to fix everything about themselves.
Yes.
And they're told to do it, please do it privately, please do it quietly. We don't want to see that. Come back when you can play with the big kids.
Yeah.
But what ends up happening is that separates people.
Yes.
And when we're separate, we're not powerful. And B, it really does lead you to believe that the only way to show up with power is to sort of secretly control everything. Which, I say that and it sounds super judgmental. That's not what it's meant to be. I feel like that is the expectation that has been placed on many women in the workplace. Please secretly control everything. Make them think it's their idea. You get all of these different ways of getting your point through, but not necessarily being able to take credit for it or anything like that. So really manipulation is the only option left in many cases. But what that does, like we said, it separates people. And I think that really encourages these cultures of competition, and it almost guarantees there's a certain amount of backstabbing, because it wouldn't even have been thought of as backstabbing. If your only goal is moving yourself forward, it becomes easy to forget that you have an impact on the people around you and their success and their failure.
I would like to briefly introduce our co-star, Ashland,
Yes.
who is behind us right here. She's gonna come and hang out with us as we talk about power.
Yes.
The narrative that there's not enough power to go around, I think, is what we keep coming back to, the scarcity model. And our friend Christina Blacken talks about this beautifully in all of her work. When we have a scarcity model, when we think that there is not enough power to go around, we inherently then hoard it for ourselves. Or we try to grab it when we can get some of it, and we try to take it from other people because that becomes our only option, as opposed to reframing power as something that we can share. And I want to keep coming back to communication here because we are communication experts and that's what we do. I think, Julie, we've talked about this so much, this idea of wanting to have influence, wanting to have control, wanting to affect your will, which is one way that we manifest power, but also wanting everybody to be okay with it and still like you when you do it.
Yep.
Tell us more about that.
It goes to 17 thoughts trying to come out at the same time, because it is a theme that we see over and over and over again in this idea that women are supposed to be likable, that you should be warm before you're competent. This is actually in articles. Warmth and competence. Women must be warm before they can be competent. So what this ends up, when you throw all of this into a culture of people pleasing, a culture of motivated, ambitious, first generation going to college, like the ambition that I see now, we end up with this odd thing of, I can win, but I haven't really won if there's hurt feelings behind me, or other people don't like me. Hurt feelings almost makes it sound like it's about that person, in which I don't ultimately think it is. It's about that person's perception of you for the most part, because that's what impacts us as we move into our careers and move forward in our companies, is this idea of perception.
Yes.
So go please.
And perception kind of comes back to all of this research that we did last summer on authenticity. So part of how we came to executive presence and power in all of these different arenas to explore is through our very first philosophy as a company: authentic voice, authentic presence, authentic power. And the more we worked with people, the more that we saw how complicated that was. We started with the idea of complexity. It just keeps getting more complicated because we as human beings communicate in context. So there is no, I make a decision and it always works, because context is different every time. The person you're talking to is different every time. So with this large question of like, what even is authenticity? What does it mean to be authentic? What does it mean to have an authentic voice? We came to a couple of toxic definitions of authenticity that we have. One of them being authenticity means I'm the same person in all circumstances, which is not possible. Nobody talks to a puppy the same way they talk to their boss. Toxic definition number 2 would be authenticity means that I can and should reveal all of myself, all of my feelings, all of my opinions, all of who I am at all times, which is a kind of authenticity that is only accessible to people with power. And just think about anyone who's in a lower position at any organization whatsoever. If you reveal your authentic feelings at all times, chances are you're going to get fired. You're going to lose your job. And then there's the aspirational version of authenticity, which I think has the potential to be really wonderful, but can also feel like, okay, if I'm showing up aspirationally, if I'm choosing where I want to be at all times, how I want to be, how I want to be effective, it can start to feel like a costume, which is where we got into the idea of executive presence. And the 3 main problems with authenticity in the workplace were that we see it as this personal thing when it's really happening in context. We misunderstand the idea of perception. We don't even really sometimes acknowledge that perception, whether or not we are perceived as authentic, is so important. And then we really underestimate how power affects our ability to be authentic. So do you have anything to say about that?
I mean, because I think the sentence is, power belongs with whose perception matters.
Oh, yes.
It's whose perception matters that we have to care about as we're looking to both, establish careers and build our own leadership legacies. So what we came to with this exploration of executive presence is a few ways that we're talking about power. And I think this can give us a frame for the rest of our discussion today. So we believe that power is measured in the workplace in communication terms by your effect on others. Do people listen to you? Do people take you seriously? Whatever that means. Are people willing to be led by you?
And if they are unwilling, can you convince them, accomplish your goals, or manifest your will anyway? How do you handle obstacles when you encounter them? Can you overcome them? Can you destroy them? Can you ignore them? Or are you weak? And I think we can get back to that. And then the tangled web of confidence and charisma. Do people see you as a confident person, and do you yourself feel confident? And are people drawn to you? This idea of charisma. So with that as a giant frame, where do we want to dive in?
What I want to first introduce, and please start thinking of your questions now, because this is going to help guide the discussion with what's interesting to you all. This idea of, we think of all of these different models of power, and I think that there's power of the dominance model, power over, and we talk a lot about this. And then there's this idea of generous power that you were talking about. This power over, if we're going to play that game, there is inherently a winner and a loser.
Yes.
And this is why what we teach when we're talking about having power in your body is not about how you can overpower someone, because that enters you into a battle of the death that you better win. But if we can stay out of that, we can really utilize our communities instead of, again, this what separates us. So I want to, as we're talking about power, just make that distinction from our end, that there really is a big difference in the kind of, and I think we're seeing it in 2022 in the United States, the cooperative versus the me first.
The collective versus the individual as a defining philosophy. The other thing that I think taking it out of the win-lose binary does is it gives us room for play.
Yes.
It gives us room for art. Again, back to our founding philosophy as Vital Voice Training, if there is no right, then there is only what's effective. There's only what we can try. There's experimentation. There's room to make choices. And I think I keep coming back to choices and agency as a source of personally feeling powerful within structures that aren't designed for you. And I love, Martha, thank you. Power belongs with those whose perception matters.
Yes. And the other thing, because what you're saying makes me think about, with our clients coming to us hoping, fix me, please help me become impenetrable to the toxic bullshit that's surrounding me. I think that there's almost an idea that there is a strategy that can show up for you. So I keep going back to all those things that you said, but also showing up. What does it mean to show up? What does it mean to show up with all of you within these constraints and not become like a hollow shell version of a leader, which isn't what we're looking for. You can win the game with all of your strategy, but what have you won if you've kind of left yourself back before the starting line?
So I want to ask a question of the audience right now, which is, we've been talking power. I think sometimes it's easier to talk about things when we define them by their opposite. So if we're thinking about what it means to be weak, and particularly in the world of communication, what words come to mind? What is weakness in communication? And I, just to get the conversation started while we're waiting for that 10-second delay, what do you think of when you think of weak communication? Or what do our clients keep coming to us with when it comes to feeling weak?
I'm just going to dive right into something that it's actually a really big reason for my interest in vocal training. A lot of our clients come to us because they feel like they're being talked over in meetings, or that sense of when you're in a space with a group of people and you say something and no one responds to it, that feeling of being completely invisible. A lot of our clients experience that, and it feels to them like weakness. It's not weakness. And there's a lot of different threads that go through that, including that we have a very extroverted, favored culture right now. And when we're talking to people, the answer isn't to just start talking more with nothing to say, but it's a for people who run on the more quiet side, that's not a weakness. And we do often hear people coming to us thinking that it is. It is a difference in strategy for looking at the situation that you're landing in. It's also recognizing what's systemic, what's yours. It's okay, if this is what this is, this realistic push-off place, not where we wish we were starting from.
Mm-hmm.
Landing in the reality of the moment, accepting the reality of the moment, not because we like it, but because that is what it is, is where we can start to look for changes in strategy and finding more power with those situations where we might feel quieted. And that takes it out of your only tactic is to speak up louder. Because if we're talking about if it's not just you, there's a lot of other, both during the meeting and in prep for the meeting, there are a lot of different avenues for creating the conditions for your own success.
Yes, which we're going to get into so much in just a few minutes. I want to say Madeline's comment out loud. Weakness is when you're ignored or dismissed, which I think we just talked about. And I want to talk about kind of the extrovert side of that puzzle, because I think it is also something we see in our clients a lot. So, again, we work with some of the most highly motivated and particularly personal development focused people on the planet, and men and women, people of all genders. And I think that when an extrovert wants to make their voice heard, and maybe they feel somewhat more comfortable speaking up, but they end up still feeling like they're playing that loudest voice wins game, we get into a topping each other dynamic that I think gets exhausting. First of all, I think that it is ultimately not as effective in terms of how people pay attention to you, how they actually hear your words. I think it starts to become about form and not function sometimes. Like, if I can be charismatic, if I can be exciting, if I can be charming or likable or warm and just like turn that up to 11 and fight to be heard, then maybe people will take me seriously. And again, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But I think most of the time when we're in that fight to be heard place, or fight to be likable, fight to be charming, we are fundamentally in our nervous system and not really being present with the people that we're talking to.
I was an anecdote on that. I pretty much almost walked out of grad school when our first social event ended up being all of these people who I didn't know starting to get into a Those Who Loudest Win singing of Rent songs. Now, that was the only time that ever happened because our spirits were broken about halfway into October and we all stopped.
That's an effective way to shut people down. Just break their spirits. I think all of us have probably been in an environment where that is true.
But this is the thing with extroverts and introverts. We need each other.
We do.
We
really
need each
do.
other. Why does it have to be, I need to model you, and why should you need to model me? And why can't we figure out where our skill sets are best suited? I feel like this is where we get into this generous power. Because if you look at being visible, we can offer opportunities of visibility for everyone. This is when we employ our extrovert.
We can use our superpowers for good, y'all. We can help amplify the underheard voices in the room.
And introverts are also, and this is just FYI, just a huge generalization, but introverts, because of observing the room, can often be the ones to invite other people in the conversation as well.
Yeah.
So use those powers for good.
Absolutely. Well, that kind of takes us beautifully into the 4 arenas and how we can actually start to map out some solutions to these very complex issues. So when we look at voices, we look at them in what we call Your Voice 101, which is the 4 arenas of your voice. Now, to just put a blanket statement out there, your voice and communication style is made up of everything that makes you, you on the planet. It is, again, complicated and a little messy. So we're putting it into this architecture so that we can start to tease out what choices we can make. So the 4 arenas of voice are the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the social. We usually start with the physical, but today I want to start with the social because this is kind of where our discussion has been so far, talking about our cultural ideas of power, talking about how our voices function within conversations and within environments. And this is where I think we have to acknowledge yet again the larger structures that we all exist in. And those go into cultural stories. Those go into things like racism and sexism and homophobia and ableism and all of those isms that affect how we are seen, how we are perceived in the world. It also goes into things that are slightly less macro, which is like, how does your team communicate? How does your office see effective communication? What does it mean to give a great presentation in your office? Who are the power hero stories in your office? Who is deemed powerful, confident, charismatic, all of those things? And those can be very individual from culture to culture. How our clients in the finance industry versus how our clients in tech startups experience their offices are very different.
Very, very different.
Very different. And with that, I want to talk about, I'm going to throw this to you in a second. I want to talk about what I think is happening right now culturally is that, we had this huge racial reckoning with the murder of George Floyd. We've been talking about DEI, and I say we as a larger American culture. We've been talking about DEI. We've been talking about racism. We've been talking about showing up authentically at work. I think a lot of people are experiencing environments that are saying the right things, that may be even investing in workshops, that may be bringing in experts, that may be talking the good talk. But what they actually experience is very, very different. And that messes with you on a very deep level. That is the Funhouse Mirror that I am currently experiencing on StreamYard, where I'm moving one hand, but the other hand is moving on the video. You feel like what can you even do when you're through that Funhouse Mirror where people are telling you we care about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We care about getting all voices heard, but what's actually happening in context is the opposite.
This is where I think we have a national problem of not talking about the distance between A and B. I always go back to being raised on montage scenes that don't actually show you how a skill was mastered. They are supposed to give the impression that lots of time has passed, but at this point they're shorthand for you can do this in 5 minutes of upbeat power ballad or whatever it is. And so I think that we don't think about the process of how we take those concepts and put them into behavior.
Yes.
This is fundamentally what acting is, taking what's up here and putting it into behavior. And I think that is a crucial missing step that we have right now. And I think companies need to be aware of a couple of things. One, that's where it gets expensive, both if you don't do it and to invest in the experts to come in and make that happen, because it takes a very special skill set. And I also think that if we don't get it into behavior, you're not allowing people to experience these social changing concepts on this deep, bone deep level. It isn't sticking, I guess would be another way to say it. It isn't owned.
Yeah.
And this kind of gets me, as I'm skipping around, y'all become familiar with my brain if you haven't become so already. This idea of we don't have a national set of core values right now. And when we're talking about DEI and investing and in making all voices heard, that depends on having a shared set of core values that this is what's important. And therefore we will do what it takes to get there.
Yeah.
Not the checkbox, but what it takes. And what it takes is the translation of intellect into behavior. And I will step off my soapbox now.
Well,
very passionate.
I'm about to put you right back on your soapbox because I want to bring up the idea, since you brought up core values and we're talking about systems right now. We have messages of what you are supposed to do. And I think as you come up in organizations, hitting your marks is important. And then once you get to a position of power and of leadership, as you're trying to make that great leap from middle management, let's call it, to a higher level position, we redefine the idea of rules. And this is something that we also talked about with authenticity, the idea of what it means to be a rule breaker and where that is valued. So like I said, I'm throwing you back on your soapbox, Julie, because I want to hear it.
Right. And this very much goes back to the Poise conversation that we had last week.
Yep.
How I feel about all of this. And what I notice, so again, ambitious, very accomplished clients, and it's both men and women that come to work with us, not just women, show up. They have mastered be polite. They have mastered, navigate your way through these systems. They've mastered the rules.
Yeah.
And then this is where this curveball gets thrown at you. And I haven't solved this. So this is a place that we're looking at questions of where your authority actually starts being measured by how well you can break the rules and get away with it. There is, and this goes to everything from, I'm really fascinated by manners and style work and, previous times, culture, and how to break that down. And you really start to see how there in every society, Western European, because that's my style specialty, there is a reward for people who can break the rules that are in power. And it's this, you can't even get to that level because not everyone's allowed to break the rules. And it becomes this catch-22. So this is something that I think about. Your perfect adherence to manners and etiquette and whatever those things are only gets you so far.
Yeah.
And that's not what the promise was when we started learning those things.
Yeah. So we bring up the social arena and we talk about structures and we talk about expectations and rule breaking and all of that stuff and we do that first within the power discussion, because this is the arena where we have the least control. But it's also the arena where we see the most effect. We see the results that we want. So that in and of itself is confusing and it's frustrating, and it makes you feel sometimes, I think, like you will never have power. You will never feel powerful or feel like you have the effect that you want. So what we want to offer today is what we can do in the other three arenas to deal with what we can't control in the social arena. And this is a stake I want to put in the ground really hardcore. Everyone that we know, ourselves very much included, is exhausted right now.
Yeah.
The world is frustrating. Things aren't changing quick enough, or they're changing too quickly in the bad way. And it starts to feel like we can't do anything about it. And I think that what we've been trying to claim for ourselves right now is small, consistent action and seeing the potential positives that are around us, even as everything gets so negative. And I want to thank our friend Kate O'Neill for this idea of optimism as a responsibility, optimism as if we can see a better outcome, we actually are obligated to work toward it. But knowing that we're all exhausted right now, what I want to give you the gift of is letting go of the shit you have no control over, because that takes up too much of our precious resources. Ain't nobody got time for that right now, right? So if we let go of controlling other people's perception of us, the larger cultural communication core values that we exist in, the frameworks, not so that we let them lie because they don't deserve that, but so we can take individual action in other ways that we believe very strongly does affect the larger stuff, then we can actually feel like we can take an empowered action.
Yes, and as we reveal those other three arenas, what we're looking for, what power can I have that I don't need anyone else's permission for?
Ah, yes.
This is where this is interesting to us. So we're going to talk about that.
Yeah. So I want to, do we want to ask another question of the audience while we get into some of this other stuff? And I'm trying to think which one we ask.
What I would like to know from y'all is, what dark power or evil power do you wish you had?
Yes.
And you can think as ridiculous as you want, or you can think very realistically. We love the gamut of these responses. And this is if you weren't worried about people seeing you as a good person. It doesn't, and I always like to say, in the arena of imagination, it's not a secret comment on what you really are under the surface. It's your imagination, and it is there to help introduce you to the spectrum of what it needs to exist in this world. So you can go dark and not worry that we're not going to judge you. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, so and again, while we wait for that lovely 10-second delay, some of the things that come up when we ask this question within workshops, a lot the things that come up are, I wish that I always had the right words with which to respond to an asshole. Someone says something that's gross or sexist or racist or whatever, and I wish that I could just cut them down to size with the perfect script. Another thing that comes up is I wish I could read minds. I wish that I could see what people were really thinking and therefore be able to make smarter decisions about how to get them on board with whatever my ideas are. And then what are the other ones that have come up?
Well, I call them the quiet violence ones. They involve discrete stabby things coming out of our body parts.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, being able to penetrate people with laser beams from your eyes, or my whole thing about like walking around with like a cane. I guess this would be sort of like Charlie's Angels, the Crispin Glover character, that has just a little spike in it. So when people, are going by in my neighborhood, it's very, very loud vehicles. You can just do a little like, whoopsie. Again, not anything that I'm looking to actually pursue, but sometimes the fantasy feels delicious.
Oh, there is power in fantasy, y'all. We've got a great comment here. To not give a shit what other people think of me.
Yeah.
And that goes back to the conversation about likability and power being a thing that I only feel like I have if I can enact my will and have everyone be thrilled about it. No one gets angry at me or thinks that I'm a bitch for enacting my will. And there really are people who walk through the world who don't give a crap about what anybody thinks of them. And
I know a couple of them.
And do we like those people? Do we want to be those people? Sometimes, but they sometimes are very evil. Yeah.
Well, but this is such an interesting question.
Spectrum.
This goes to the dark power thing.
Yeah.
I just full out, I'll say it. I despise, I can't even say his name, previous president, really deeply, deeply, deeply. And yet I am shocked and stunned by the impact of what that person has been able to get away with.
Yeah.
And this goes back to the power of breaking rules that aren't evenly applied.
Yeah.
I don't want those actions. I don't want his particular impact, but that reach of impact.
Yeah.
Oh, hell yes. Hell yes.
Where you just basically say a thing and it manifests.
And it manifests or disappears.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, okay. So thank you all for throwing in some dark powers in here. Now I want to get back to what I think we can actually do about this. Because I think one of the things that unites the desire for all the dark powers and blocks our access to the brighter version of them is our nervous system and our nervous system's level of activation. And to remind anybody who's new and missed the beginning of the discussion, like thinking about power as a win-lose dynamic, thinking about feeling attacked, thinking about feeling threatened. These are the things that inherently activate our nervous systems and make us a little dumber because we're cut off from our thinking brains, and they make us feel like we've lost. So we often, we start that stimulus of an activated nervous system, and because of the cultural messages that we have, again, about polish and poise, that you don't ever show that anyone has had an effect on you or a negative effect, just feeling those sensations in your body feels so powerless because we don't feel like we have any control over our nervous systems. Our nervous systems are now running the show and we're screwed. And we want to give you some real tools to deal with that right now. And that takes us to, again, these other arenas, the physical, the mental, and the emotional. So where do we want to dive in there?
I want to say that the image that just came to mind for me is if you've ever, subway cars or Metro North or whatever, they have the head cars on both ends. So when the train changes directions, it doesn't have to spin on the tracks.
Yeah.
I think sometimes our internal train changes directions and that amygdala side is suddenly doing the leading, but we haven't yet noticed. We still think it's our thinking brain that's making the choices. And I think that changes this discussion to recognize that this is a physiological thing, not a moral thing.
Yeah. So I want to talk about, I think we can frame this in before, during, and after, because this is a way to look at this stuff in a context and with a little bit of structure. So the mental arena of voice and communication as it sort of marries with the social. And this is going to kind of come back to something that I just said earlier, which is letting go of what you can't control. But there is stuff that we can control, or that we have at least a little bit of agency over. I don't think we ever have total control over literally anything in our lives, because that is just the reality of being a human being around other human beings. But we do have choices that we can make. So before you enter situations where you want to feel more powerful, I want to give you the term given circumstances, which is a theater term for the who, what, when, where, and why of our scene. It's what's actually happening. And of course, in real life, we don't have the benefit of a lovely script that a playwright wrote for us and all of the information about what's going to happen before and after this scene. But we do have some information. We can think about what is, this is one thing we talk about a lot. What do people say this meeting is about? And what is this meeting actually about? Has anyone experienced that where like the meeting on the surface is we're delivering the quarterly sales numbers, and under the surface it's everybody's freaking out because the sales numbers aren't what they need to be. They don't know if they're going to have a job tomorrow. They don't know if the company's going to get funded. They don't know if they need to jump ship, and they're freaking out. So what the meeting is really about is reassuring people or calming people down or any of that stuff. That's just one example of given circumstances. What else can we think about with given circumstances?
Given circumstances can be applied to both the actual physical things. So, given circumstances, I'm on Zoom. There's particular things that we know about Zoom now that we didn't at the beginning, that we were, again, beating ourselves up for. When we're on Zoom, we're not sharing the same atmosphere with other people. So you already have to say, I can't look at other people's screens and determine what they're thinking and feeling the same way I could right in front of you. That's one example of what this can do for you. Who's in the room? What those people mean to you, what the last interaction with them was like. Are these people that you know? Are these people, what's the status of these people? What's the stakes of this conversation? So in this, you get to start creating a map. And we do this a lot. So we've got a whole guidebook of how to do given circumstances, but it reveals a little bit more in depth that there are strategies to be made ahead of time, which will allow you to be able to let the things go that need to be let go. So this is in this control, but you can. So, okay, so I know the boss of my company is in there, and he's a weird dude that likes frogs a lot and won't let you look him directly in the eye. Okay, well, I know I'm not going to go in there and show off my leadership by saying, look at me, turn around, look at me. That would not be a good tactic. Yeah. But it does mean that I could spend some time using my creativity. How do you get the attention of somebody who kind of wishes they were only surrounded by amphibians? These are, I don't think that, as random as that example is, the weirdness we've seen in some companies,
it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Out of the realm of possibility.
It really, really isn't. Yeah. So we do this mental pre-work to give us that frame in which we can start to make choices, and it gives us the frame of what we can let go and just not even think about anymore, not give our valuable time and resources and energy to. And then we step into the arena, and inevitably things change.
Yep.
You have a goal, and the goal has to shift to a different goal. You have people who you think are in the meeting that you've done all your research on, and maybe one of them doesn't show up, or somebody new comes in that you haven't had a chance to do your research on. And that's when we start to get this nervous system activation that can instantly make us feel less powerful. So that goes into, I care very much about what these people in the room think about me. I care very much about doing a good job. I cannot read anyone's minds in this room. As much as we repeat very often that we all have a human BS meter, that human BS meter is certainly not, it's more of a divining rod than it is like a teleprompter that will tell you what to do next, right?
Yes.
So when we lack information, or we care too much, or things have shifted that we don't have any control over because we don't have ultimate control, that's when our nervous system starts to come up. So let's talk about what we can do in the moment to deal with that activated nervous system.
Yes. So Casey's saying, we get this stimulation that our body interprets as a threat. And we talk about this as a threat to our survival, but we want to make really sure to include that ostracization, exclusion is something that stimulates our nervous system because it does threaten our survival.
Yeah.
So we get stimulation that sets off this whole chain of events with our nervous system that will release cortisol from the amygdala. This is that tiny, tiny gland in the back of the brain that is in charge. It's our lizard brain. So basically it comes in, it's like, okay, I'm in charge. We're going to do this. Shuts down the thinking brain, pumps the blood to the limbs so we can flee or fight. It evacuates our digestive system. If anyone's ever experienced that, that's always super fun. The moment before you have a serious conversation. And sets us up to be able to defend our very lives. Now, the problem being we don't really have many situations where we're going to be able to solve by American gladiatoring or, and we're going to compete. Whoever wins this marathon is going to get the project. We don't have that.
And you often can't just run out of the conference room because you have to be there.
Yes, exactly. But what we've learned about the nervous system, and later I'll want to talk about fawn and whatnot, but I won't.
Yeah, sure.
What we learned about the nervous system is that you can stop this cycle in two ways. So way number one is to take a breath. Because of the way our nervous systems work, when we can't fight or flee, our bodies say, oh, okay, well then shit. Guess I better play dead and hope they pass me. So we stop breathing. Breathing can help your body remember that it is living. It can give it oxygen. It can keep it from going into a panic because there's not enough oxygen. Its own catch-22, its own perpetuating cycle of moving forward. And the other thing we can do is, often when we feel nervous, we'll beat ourselves up or say, wow, everyone can see how nervous I am. Oh, I'm so stupid, or whatever mean inner critic is coming just at that point. You're down to kick you. It sucks. That doesn't calm our nervous systems. But what does is to focus on why we're there in the first place. Why are you here? What's the impact you want to have? What are you doing? And we don't often ask because we're so used to pre-crafting everything.
No.
We don't think of what we're doing in terms of what's actually happening in the room in a breathing, living way. We think about it as a set series of steps. If I take these, I will have won my communication. That's not what it is. Fortunately, because of who we are as humans, when you focus on impact and you're really putting your attention on something else, we like that. That helps us feel included. That helps us feel a part of it. And it really does calm down that nervous system, which will allow that prefrontal cortex, the thinking brain, where you keep all your strategy, to come back online.
And the other thing that is so crucial to this, in addition to the act of breathing and the act of having that target that then you can kind of make a flexible map toward, is how we actually take space. And this is where I want to talk about another one of our potential nervous system responses, because I think that it's one that affects very deeply how we take space, and it is incredibly socialized into women, although it is certainly not exclusive to us. And that is the reaction of fawn. Fawn being the response to a nervous system activation that says, I must please this predator that is in front of me. I must placate them. I must accommodate them, or I must prove myself as valuable to them. And we can, when we're in fawn mode, we can shrink and make ourselves very lovely and easy and non-threatening and accommodating and pretty and good girls, or we can start trying really, really, really hard. We can lean in and work hard and go into that. I'm going to tell them every single piece of information that I know about them, about this thing that we're talking about, and then they'll think that I'm credible. And it becomes word vomit. It becomes a third circle, which I think we can talk about in just a moment. So we can either blow up, which becomes ineffective because we're no longer sharing space and it's just an outward, or we can shrink and disappear. And neither of those things end up feeling powerful to us in the moment. And neither of them are ultimately very effective in the room. So I want to give you a couple of ways. Yes, you have something to say.
I want to add to what you're saying.
Yes.
We talked about how that blowing up creates this win-lose dynamic. I really also want to point out that the shrink does too.
Yes, it does.
Your shrink in front of other people prompts, again, this enter into this zero-sum game of power.
Yeah. So we want to give you an alternate way to be that is not shrink and disappear, go into freeze, wish you could run out of the room. And it also doesn't go into blow up, fight for what you want with no connection to your actual goals, just kind of in destroy mode, or in pleasing mode or proving yourself mode, where you're leaned forward and you're no longer centered. We want to give you the idea of what it feels like if we redefine power as this gravitas and centering that has potential movement in it. We talked about this a little bit when we talked about poise, the idea of poise having fluidity, but this really goes into the power arena too. So this is our signature thing. And if this could someday go, we're going to get t-shirts, y'all, at some point in time. The direction I want to give everyone that is listening right now or watching later is let your butt be big. And that as the alternative to squeezing up into good girl posture and being very polite to your furniture and perching, or shrinking away so that no one sees you. Letting your butt be big. And I'm going to just ask all of y'all that are watching right now to try this. Go ahead and find your sits bones in your chair, your pelvis, and just rock back and forth a little bit. And you can rock forward and back, side to side, finding the center of your pelvis in the chair, and then just letting whatever furniture you are on take your actual weight, as opposed to pulling up away from that weight. We can't make ourselves look any smaller as much as we may like to because of cultural conditioning. But what we can do is inhabit space in a way that tells our nervous systems on a fully private level that we're allowed to be in the room, that we belong in the room. Let your butt be big as a way to signal to your nervous system that you are safe in this room and that you belong in this room. And it also signals to everyone else that you're not hiding and you're not fighting, you're present. And presence is powerful.
Yes.
Now I have 17 thoughts again.
It's letting your butt be big. Notice we use the word let instead of make. It's this shift from doing to allowing. And this is something that allows us, again, back to allow, to show up fully, but with motion and breathability. So we're shifting a little bit from, you can't breathe the best. You can't have the biggest, I mean, you could have the biggest butt, but it wouldn't be what we're talking about necessarily. It's about these subtle shifts of allowing yourself to occupy the space that's already yours, which we believe doesn't take space from anybody else. And it just taking space, and especially the butt. It's both a really sensitive place for many women, this idea of like, my butt's so big, but it's also your midway point in your body. It is the gate between your feet and your torso. It is where we actually need to have a little bit of real estate so our lungs can expand. We need that to be soft and released. And additionally, the sass of just being able to say, there's no amount of slight squeeze or subway sit that where like one ass cheek is up so you don't touch the person next to you. There is no amount of that that's going to help you with your success and your bigger goals. So what's the alternative? And that's let's before we start trying to demand other space. And if you want to demand space, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm talking for the people that isn't what they want to do. Take the space you already have. And take it fully. And see if you maybe day by day can start slowly expanding the bubble and the sphere that you allow yourself to exist in. Because I guarantee you there's a habitual, familiar bubble of space you're giving to yourself that's been influenced by all the social things, and probably also your city. Because I know in New York, it's smaller. My bubble grew in San Francisco, like Grinch 12 sizes. So thinking about that subtle shift.
Well, so I noticed that we have about 5 minutes left before our official end, and I want to open the floor for any questions that you have about literally any of this. But while we're waiting for those questions to come in, I want to talk about 2 more ways that we can take space. We can take time space, and we can take energetic space. So time space goes into the idea of how we actually say our words, how many words we say, what our words are. And I don't say all of those things to freak you out. Oh my God, there's so much to think about with time space. I want to leave it in a very simple place for today, which is that your ideas deserve to take up space. Your voice deserves to take up space. Your body deserves to take up space. So by taking the space for your thoughts and your ideas and your voice, you are enacting something very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think often we're socialized to believe, Jessica, we're socialized when we take physical space that we might be taking space from someone else. We have that idea about our voices and our ideas as well. What if by taking space with your body, by taking space with your voice and your ideas, you are actually giving permission to someone else in the room who's watching you as a model? What if we can reframe taking space as an act of generosity, as an act of generous power, as an act of a new version of power that we want to see in the world? That reframe, I think, can be huge. And then I want to finish by talking about taking energetic space. Julie?
This is where we go to our long and glorious tradition of vocal coaches. To find one, her name is Patsy Rodenberg, and she developed, she's kind of a grande dame in the UK of voice coaching, which you actually find a lot. These very full of gravitas, and everything they say is a proclamation of sorts. What she did was develop a way to look at how we occupy energetic space,
Mm-hmm.
and that would be first, second, and third circle. And first circle is that I'm very internal. It can be the introvert circle. It can be the I'm sort of collapsed on myself. It can also be the retreat of I'm so cool, I'm leaning back. It's a way of your energy radiating inward towards yourself at its core. Yeah. And then on the other side, you have third circle, which Casey was touching about. That's that it's out, it's coming at you. It's a Zamboni of energy that may or may not be appropriate for the situation, but it's all very external in the same way that first circle is very internal. So they're opposites of each other. And then in the middle, we have second circle. And this is this essence of what I'm advocating for us to show up, figure out what we need to show up, figure out what we need for the conditions for our own success to show up. Because that power in that second circle, that place that you're listening and talking, responding and influencing, it's a back and forth. It is a dance. And that is communication. Yeah. That arena, that's powerful communication.
Absolutely.
It's expert tennis. It's not, I just hold the ball and like run around with it. I think that's just a really important way to look at it.
Yeah. And I'm keeping my eye out for questions, but I want to finish up by telling you a little bit about something that we're going to be doing very soon. We are currently in enrollment period for our course, our baby, the thing that we love so much to do, Power Play Beyond Executive Presence. So we've been exploring these ideas of polish and poise and power. And we do that because we want to give a frame and give ideas that help, in this case, women and femme presenting people to be more powerful in the world on their terms, on the terms of play and experimentation and showing up and getting your ideas out and having the influence and the impact that you want to have. We're starting on February 5th. It runs for 10 Saturdays. This is the only time in 2022 that we'll be doing this version of the course, the 10 Saturday version. We will pop the link in the comments, but if you want to check it out right now, it's vitalvoicetraining.com/the course, or you can just go to vitalvoicetraining.com and you'll see it pop up. If you want to talk about being part of the course, we would love to talk to you in the next couple of days.
100%. And the course is everything that we know of how to put these ideas into behavior.
Yes.
In those three arenas of what we can control. How do I move through the world? What power do I have that I don't need anyone's permission for? And that's exploring in the rhythm that you move at, the space you occupy, how to take up space. We have amazing guests that come in and talk about their specialties, one of whom is here today. So hello. And it's just really fun, very comprehensive, and really powerful with the relationships that get built between the participants. So if you're on the shy side, don't worry. This is my thing. I will ensure that this is a space that you can feel comfortable and grow the same way somebody who already feels very confident speaking up will be taken care of as well.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us today for our very first LinkedIn Live, our very first StreamYard experience. We really, really appreciate it. If you have more questions, please pop them in the comments. I'll be keeping an eye on this. You can always get to us and schedule a 15-minute consultation on our website. We would love to chat with you about any of this. We also do corporate workshops and we do private coaching as well as our course. And we really, really care about this.
Yes.
I hope that if you got anything out of this, you can see how dorky we are about this and how much we love the work that we do and that we get to do with people like you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Voice is produced and edited by us, Casey Aaron Clark
and Julie Fogg. Our theme song from this point on is from Softkill.
If you'd like to learn more about Vital Voice Training and all the different ways that we work with both individuals and organizations, you can find everything you need to know on our website, vitalvoicetraining.com.
You can also follow us on Twitter at @vital_voice and on Instagram at Vital Voice Training. If you enjoyed what you heard today, we would love for you to rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And remember,
your voice, your body, and your ideas deserve to take up space in the world.